of, oh, live stream warning came up, of Lenape-Hoking and the island of Manhattan. The land the new school university is built upon, including all of New York City, present-day New Jersey, and eastern Pennsylvania along the Delaware River watershed, western Long Island, and the lower Hudson Valley, comprise Lenape ancestral homeland. This land was not ceded nor sold, as folklore would have us believe, to the Dutch for beads and trinkets. This land was forcibly taken through occupation by European settlers, resulting in displacement, forced migration, and genocide. In the present day, there are Lenape communities throughout North America, though much of the original Lenape territory remains under settler occupation and control. As settlers who benefited from the colonization of sovereign land, we acknowledge our responsibility to examine and question systems of oppression that continue through to the present day, and educate ourselves about the original stewards of this land. We also want to acknowledge the Haudenosaunee ironworkers from the Six Nations of the Iroquois, mostly from the Mohawk tribe, whose labor built many iconic skyscrapers and steel bridges in the city of New York. As recently as 2012, about 200 of the 2,000 structural ironworkers in the city were Mohawk. Every day we view the city skyline of Manhattan, we are reminded of their contributions. I would like to now introduce our guest, Dr. Nettrice R. Gaskins. I've known Nettrice for right around a decade at this point, I believe. I was so excited to hear that she was going to be able to join us tonight for this event. What doesn't Nettrice do? I think that's probably maybe a shorter list than the things that Nettrice does. She teaches, she writes, she fabs, she makes art using algorithms and machine learning. I have to imagine you've probably bumped into some of Nettrice's work on the internet. I feel like over the last year, I've seen your work showing up increasingly, Nettrice, all over the place. We're super excited to have her here with us tonight. I ask you all to join me for some modest Zoom applause as we turn the stage over to Nettrice.
Thank you, John. And I'm going to share my screen. And good evening, everyone. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about sort of a timeline of how I came to be. And so what you see here is a ceramic slab roller and a Commodore 64. The reason why you see that is that's actually the first computer graphics class that was in the classroom in high school. So my ceramics teacher, the one that taught me pottery, was the one that also taught me computer graphics. And so the way, apparently on the first day of class, the computers hadn't arrived yet. So she brought from her house a Commodore 64 and she put it on top of the slab roller. And she said, "Welcome to computer graphics." That was 1988. No, 87, 1987. So I became really interested in making art on computers a long time ago. And so this is some of the work that I was doing in 87 and 88. So you can see the pixels, you can see there's sort of a resurgence of pixel art. So sort of fits in that kind of category, but I was using an Amiga computer to create these works. And one was for a brochure for, I guess, National Science Foundation competition. And you can see that in the lower left. And then I was really into poetry and also culture, and specifically heritage, cultural artifacts. What I didn't realize is that would play a role in my doctoral work many, many years later. And I was really into Avenali at the time. So you can see some of this kind of there's also fantasy related type of imagery and kind of stuff that I was doing even as a high school student. Yeah, so after going to Pratt in 1988, a few years later, when I was at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, midway through my second year, first semester, second year, I decided to do an independent study by building a computer lab and computer graphics lab in a housing development in Queens, New York. So even I took a chance, and all my professors signed off on what I was signed off on my work, and I was able to fly back to New York and actually build this lab. And so these are some photographs that I took at the time of the kids who would come down and to the basement of the housing development community center and make computer art. And this was a way of sort of giving back to the community. As I was learning how to use these computers, I noticed that as I taught art around the city, New York City, that these opportunities were not available for kids that were like in these communities. So I wanted to make try this out and see what they would think about computer graphics. And for some reason, and so later on, so I spent some time after that, I graduated in the community doing community art, eventually community media and technology. And then I had an opportunity as a Georgia Tech PhD student to work with some kids in New Mexico, in this case, Albuquerque. So I was working with the augmented reality, augmented environments lab at Georgia Tech. And we were using a platform called Argon for AR. And we were, this is all experimental in a sense. And so we brought this technology to the youth, and we did this kind of interactive mural. So we put the frame markers for the interactivity on the outside of the mural. And then we went to a sort of process that eventually led to my doctoral work. And so this was part of Isaiah 2011 or 2012. And here you see on the left, this is what happens if you're on this is in the desert. So if you're in a train and you have a mobile phone and you're going past in a train and you have the Argon app open, when you you point your camera at the mural, you see these images, and then there's one sound file that plays, and they're all created by the youth. I did put together the composition from many different sources that the kids came up with. So on the right, you see them collaborating on the design in terms of colors. And below that, we used a culturally situated design tool called Graffiti Grapher, produced at RPI under Ron Eglash. And they were using that as well to create the designs, and all that was incorporated in the mural. And so that was a way of bringing me both satisfying my community work as well as kind of learning a new technology, in this case, AR, and then doing something in the community in Albuquerque. This is a couple of years later, and I took that same model working with young people and brought it to Atlanta. So this is at Georgia Tech and Lithonia, Georgia, at the middle school there. And these students are using culturally situated design tools developed specifically for my research. And they're at the Paper Museum at Georgia Tech doing some generative art using code. And then on the right, you can see the actual computer. You see them working at the computer, doing this, using the software at the middle school. And so this is a suite of CSDTs, culturally situated design tools developed around Afrofuturism. And so the three artists that we were looking at is Sanford Biggers, Zenobia Bailey, and Saya Woolfolk. And all three of them were kind of doing these portals. For Zenobia, it was crochet. For Sanford, it was these kind of lotus images made up of petals that were actually slave ships. And then Saya was also doing these portals kind of around kind of her own university empathics that she was experimenting with. And it was a way for them to simulate those designs using kind of like a Scratch block-based coding application online that they could do. So there was both, they were learning about, culture and heritage, but also within the context of computation and from artists and simulating art forms that had a particular aesthetic, in this case, Afrofuturist type of work. and that was 2014. This workshop kind of capped my research at Georgia Tech. I kind of realized I had a model. I was using the same model I used in Albuquerque with these kids. Instead of a mural, they were creating these designs using the software, and a different type of software than Graffiti Grapher, which was, Graffiti Grapher was using a Java-based app, and it was Java-based, and it was also based on a Cartesian coordinate system, and it wasn't using like the Scratch block-based type of coding that you would do with Scratch. It was using something else, so it's a different type of tool. Okay, so you can see on the left, this is Hank Shockley, and I know John, when I was John's student, John Sharp's student at Georgia Tech, he talked about Public Enemy a little bit. So sometime around 2012, I met Hank Shockley, who was one of the members of the Bomb Squad. And Hank co-produced the first 3 or 4 Public Enemy albums, the ones that everybody knows, if you're into hip hop and the history of hip hop. So Hank was there for a conference, and I was there as well. And we kind of realized that we had some shared interest in terms of music and the types of things that music can do. So we decided to collaborate, and I called it the Electro-Funk Mixtape. So this is Hank, and this is at the ballpark in Boston. And behind him is my computer graphics. They're sound generated. So I'm going to play a video in a second so you can see the experience. And I was thinking about Africa Bambaataa and the electro-funk music coming at that period of time. And also this idea of the mixtape. It was a mix of different media types. In this case, with mix of a video projection, music, and sometimes dance and other type of performance. So this is around 2015, and I'm still collaborating, but this time I'm collaborating with youth and collaborating with DJs that were local or DJs that I knew to do these type of projects. So Hank was really interesting because he was looking at some of the types of things I could do with the music visualization program I was using. And he wasn't really happy with any of the things. He wanted something that matched the music. And so we talked about it for a few minutes, very, very short conversation. And then I showed him how I was using arrays to generate this kind of noise or static. And he felt that this was really more representative of the type of music that he makes and produces and plays as a DJ. So the clip that I'm going to show is Hank. So behind him is that noise. Unfortunately, I didn't have a flat surface to project on, which was something I was pissed off about, but it really worked out just in the sense it was a moment. It was very crowded, there were people there, very loud. It was what I call a virtual sounding space. In terms of what was happening. And so I'm going to play a video, stop sharing, and show a little clip of that. A second. Of course. Looking for my my window. It disappeared. Okay, I got it. All right. I'm gonna have to go back to share screen again. And so just bear with me. I'm gonna share a clip. And so this is Hank at the ballpark, and he's DJing and mixing music and sounds. And you can see the arrays behind him. So just imagine this kind of in the dark, and then you have the only images you see of this kind of noise. Also had it projected on the platform that Hank was standing on the front, so you could actually see what was happening. And so this was my kind of entry point in collaboration with others like DJs and even around the youth, because there was a component in Albuquerque of working with a local DJ and having a moment in the evening with the young people, also helping the VJ using the software and the coding. And so this is another example of that with Hank. And so here, this is what I was talking about. So this happened in Albuquerque. This is a student on the left preparing to use the software and using the camera using video. So his hands are being used to create some sort of design, which is then projected on a wall, in this case, a physical chapel in Taos, New Mexico. And then in the lower right, you see young people putting their faces up to the camera. And so the kids that I taught how to use the software were then able to VJ along with me, along with the DJ. And so this is all live and happening with people, and with a DJ outdoors and with video projection mapping. And so that was 2015. And so I graduated, finished, and I was done. I built a STEAM lab at Boston Arts Academy. It's the city's only school for the visual and performing arts. And so every student that I had in my AP computer science class, principals class, they were all arts majors. So they were theater, they were visual artists, and music. And so we brought in Audrey Bennett, who I think has done a Cloud Salon before, and she came in for a couple of days to do introduce quilting, a quilting CSDT, culturally situated design tool. And they were producing these types of designs using the software, and then creating physical quilts using fabric in the STEAM lab. You can see that in the inset photo, or the photo on the right. So those kinds of graphics and designs I was producing using the music visualization software kind of extended into what I was teaching at Boston Arts Academy. Sure. And so what was happening in the STEAM lab was also sort of related. On the left, you see what's a cipher. So this is the lunchtime freestyle rap cipher that the kids put together like a club. And instead of meeting in the cafeteria, they wanted to meet in the STEAM lab. So they met in the STEAM lab, I think every Wednesday during lunch, and did a cipher in the space. And then we decided to combine it with some physical computing and other types of things. So on the right, you see a student who's sort of VJing, DJing, and a teacher. And then you see Hank Shockley, who's visiting. So we go from the ballpark to the classroom with Hank. And I actually have a video of that experience so you can see what's happening. And so the virtual sounding space, this idea of this energy and things that are produced by the music and the people was extended to the class and into this kind of learning situation. And we combined physical computing, which you'll see in a second. So this is the video. So in the video, you can see at the end of the clip is using a conductive paint and a touch board. So they're using it to trigger video that's projected, mapped on the wall. This was the first experiment of that. And what was really cool is I got the touch board from Bare Conductive, and then it was used to create sound. So you can touch the different capacitive sensors on the device and play music, or you can program the MIDI, program it to be a MIDI controller and sort of our MIDI interface and play music. But I thought it'd be interesting to get it to play video. so that we can mix video, project video, and then they could switch between channels, and just by using the Arduino. And so as I was doing this in an educational sense, I was also thinking about it as an artist and as a technologist in terms of the possibilities. So I actually collaborated with, just like I collaborated with Hank Shockley, I collaborated with Bear Conductive and Matt Thomas, who now is the CEO, and he came in at the same time as Hank. He was actually in that same room during the cipher. And we were really working on how to get the device to work with projection mapping. And so I was able to do that from this and do some site installation type of work as an artist. And keep going. So this is an example of a dancer who's using conductive paint, and she's dancing on and is triggering music on the laptop. It's in a cipher, it's in a circle in a theater setting at the high school. You can see Hank meeting with students during the day, where they're telling him in their engineering class how they use the paint, and was inspired by his music or the type of mixing that he was doing with Public Enemy for this class. I talked about that. So that brings me to what I was doing in the last few years. So I mentioned Afrofuturism before. I mentioned projection mapping and physical computing, and then now I'm doing digital fabrication. So this is a project I did for the Flux Factory exhibition. They've always lived in the future. So I was inspired by Sun Ra and inspired by W.B. Du Bois, and he had a short story called The Princess Steel, or the Megascope. And so both of those things inspired me. And I met one of Sun Ra's collaborators in Boston, Bill Sebastian, who has a company called Visual Music Systems. And he collaborated with Sun Ra in the 1980s on something called the Outer Space Visual Communicator. And the Outer Space Visual Communicator was a huge device system created to sort of be the backdrop during Sun Ra and the orchestra's performances. It was too big to sort of move around, so they would do a few performances in the Boston area, then in Philly, but that was about it. But then Bill continued to improve on it and became a VR experience. So you can now wear a headset and have experience with music and visualization. So we were all, both of us were doing visualization. So you can actually see that here. And the top left is someone wearing, Janae is wearing the headset, and you can see there's a sculpture in the back with projections and images projected on it. And so I started playing around with projection mapping onto acrylic, laser etched and laser cut and etched acrylic. They were free hanging from the ceiling, kind of like prisms, just thinking about portals and prisms and many types of images and artifacts from Afrofuturism in physical space. And in this case with music, generated with music, projections on them moving to music. And that was a project I did at Flux Factory. And then I started getting into the machine learning work. So I wanted to make it clear that my interest in my sort of my art started to evolve out of my work in teaching. So by teaching young people and trying to find ways to link what they were learning in AP computer science principles and in the STEAM lab, I was finding new ways to apply it to my own artwork. So I started teaching them about algorithms and machine learning and artificial intelligence in 2016, 2017. And these are the first portraits I produced to demonstrate. So these are all my students, except for a colleague at the bottom. So the students posed for me, and then I started to use deep learning specifically to generate these portraits. And these are very, this is, years ago, this is when I first got started. I've come away since then, but I was really into fabrics. I was into textures and colors, and it was showing in how I created and generated these portraits. And so this is kind of the process. So on the left is the source image. That's me for demonstration. And then I go through a series of style images. So I'm thinking in terms of the Afrofuturism aesthetic. So I'm finding images that bring that to come to mind. So stuff that reminds me of like the old animation Fantastic Planet, There's stuff that has just textures and fractals and the kinds of things that I was researching and doing with students as a PhD student. There's also other types of images, styles that I was using to program the AI. In this case, the machine learned how to take those styles and apply it. So the output, you can see it below that. And then I composited all 3 or 4 of these different images to create one. And you see the composite image on the far right. And so as I continue to collaborate with AI, as I continue to explore this idea of using different devices to feed the machine, I started coming up with new ways of doing portraiture and a new type of aesthetic that isn't quite like using Photoshop. You can't really create these kinds of things easily using Photoshop, but you can use Photoshop to composite. So in some cases I composite the images, in other cases I don't, and it's a one-shot thing, comes out looking great. And so you see this, this is my process. So I get images like this. This is a series that I was working on. I use stock photos as well as my own photos. And you can see applying the same image style to 3 different portraits, creating these different examples. I can create series, I can create other types of things. And so this is some examples. This is another one that's popular. This one is actually from a music video. And it's really like a B-roll, like a roll type of still. And then you can see I've applied the same process to this image to create this effect. I'll stop talking in a second. I know there's supposed to be conversation. And then since I had since 2017, I've been producing all of these images. When NFTs came around, I was able to mint some of those images from stock photos and my own photos as NFTs. And they brought me right into the NFT craze that I'm currently in. I'm using Hekek, which is sort of an eco-friendly blockchain market for artists. And a lot of that work I've been doing with AI, the collaboration with deep learning, those images show up on as NFTs on my in my gallery. Finally, there's my book. So a lot of the experiences I talked about is covered in the book. It's Techno-Vernacular Creativity and Innovation. Half the book is looking at practitioners who are from communities that are not really represented in science, technology, engineering, art, and math, and how what I've learned from them and how you could take that and teach and engage kids who normally would not be interested in engineering or interested in computer science and things like that. So this is the book. It came out on August 10th. I'll stop talking so we can have conversation.
Wow. Thanks so much, Nettrice. That was a whirlwind tour of some amazing work. Wow. So for those new to Cloud Salon, well, first let's thank Nettrice for that presentation before we get into the conversation here. So the kind of general rules of Cloud Salon, given there are so many of us here, the preference is for people to either type their questions into the chat or raise your little tiny Zoom hand, and I'll get the questions to Nettrice in a first come first served basis. I'm going to use the moderator's status to ask a question. Sure. If I might. I was really intrigued with your use of the phrase collaborate when you were talking about the images you're creating with AI. Could you expand a little bit on that? Like, how did you just immediately lock into that term? Where did that, how did you get to that?
So the name of the platform that I used and introduced to the students is called a Deep Dream Generator. And I was using it, not thinking about it. And I found a particular feature of the website and was producing these portraits. And then someone blogged about it. And then turned out somebody in the comment section, when it showed up on Boing Boing, this guy was like, "You're not using Deep Dream." And I'm like, yeah. Here's the link. He said, he went the link, he came back, he said, no, you're using Deep Style. Deep Style is not Deep Dream. Deep Dream is very LSD trippy. The portraits look like they're using animals and sea creatures. And I know that's not what my work looks like. So he said, you're using the Gaddis blah, blah, blah algorithm by Leon Gaddis. And that's a different, and I went down the rabbit hole and learned the Gaddis algorithm for Deep Style. And that's what I'm using as deep learning, but it's housed under the same site. And he said, what's interesting about your images is that the artist's hand is taken back over the process in the collaboration. So what I mean is, I know that I'm giving the machine an image, and I'm telling the machine, I want you to recreate this image in this style. So it could be Picasso's Cubism if I wanted it to, or it could be something else. And then I would see what the output would be, and either I'm happy with it or I tweak some things and then I try it again. So this iterative process of understanding. So in 2019, I decided to make an image a day, at least one image I liked a day using this deep style for 365 days. So every day I would produce an image that I liked. And from that experience, I learned how the machine kind of thought, how it processed. So I was able to make smarter decisions about what images work better, what style images work better. And in the end, I was able to produce portraits that had an aesthetic, a different, people would use words like stunning or, things in terms of describing it. And so collaboration is really a collaboration. When you collaborate with someone, you're understanding how they work, you're understanding how you work, how to work together. So just like I collaborate with Hank on that, images in the back where it matched his music, that's a collaboration with a human. And then there's a collaboration with a machine.
Cool.
Thank you so much. I have a question about style, and style and appropriation. So you make these images, you collaborate with this technical system to produce a particular style. That style is unique, right, and it has a certain connection to you and to cultural aspects, right? What happens if
and it can be more than one? It can be 300 images.
Exactly.
Based on the
right?
style.
But what happens if that style is, I don't know how to say it. I'm sort of thinking about hip hop. I'm sort of thinking about jazz. I'm thinking about how Blackness and technology fuse to create particular styles that are then appropriated. So that's one part of the question. The other part of the question is, how is that complicated by the particular eccentricities of machine learning and everything that is attached to it? Which is different from, let's say, circuit boards with bending sound, or with physically sort of constructing metal for jazz. How does that differ?
So I think, so at some point I did, as a grad student in Chicago, I did take a course on sampling. How to, do that, actually do it using the same types of machines that hip hop producers used. And even when you saw Hank, he was tweaking his system, the noise based on the crowd feedback, based on his feeling at the time. So it wasn't just playing a record. It was actually call and response. And I kind of see it like that in the process of call and response. I see what the response is, and it goes back in a circle kind of in a way. But so one of the other reasons why I started using this process, it's the same technology as facial recognition that has been used negatively in Black and Brown communities. It's same computer vision, the same umbrella and so it's not facial recognition that I do, but it's the same process in a sense. The other thing that's happened is I realized that there was some aspects that's coming out of my portraiture in this process that is responding to the negative ways in which Black folks are portrayed. We talk about the way they're lit in film, Like there's an issue around, Kodak, the Shirley cards, where they're calibrating systems based on one particular type of person or people. And then when you see the film, it shows up, you don't see the Black folks who are acting, you see a shadow, or you don't see, so there's still those same dangers in terms of bias and all that stuff in the AI. But I'm trying to counter that a little bit. I didn't realize I was doing it as much until later on. Where, for example, some recent SIGGRAPH talk that I covered looked at that over the years and saw that it's based on this glow effect. I forget the name of it, but there's an algorithm that looks for glow, and it works well for Caucasian people and Europe from people, but it doesn't work well for dark skin, because dark skin shines. There's a shine, not a glow. So you always get something that doesn't look quite right in the film or the photograph. And then I blow all of that up, where I'm not even thinking about glow or shine. I'm thinking about other types of algorithmic processes as an aesthetic. So you may get a little bit of glow on this side and then get a lot of shine. So by using the system, I learned this deep learning, actually the deep style really likes outlines, and it likes to put a halo around even if it's not in the style, it just puts a halo. It's like a very light halo. And I like this halo effect. It's giving halos to all of my subjects. And it's also doing this really neat thing with line every single time. And so I said, well, that's the reason why I kept doing it, because I like that effect. But by doing some of the things I'm doing, it's countering the shine glow issue over here and creating another, through my eyes and lenses, as a Black person, as a brown person, and how I think I would like portraiture to be. And so what emerges from the style is a filter, a lens through which I experience images and how I want to see them, as opposed to how Hollywood or how other people are, photographers, people who make it into the mainstream, may portray people like me. And so that's what's been happening, and I've gotten a lot of positive response. So in terms of appropriating, if I'm using 300 images and it's scrubbing the internet for all those images, or using one, there's a lot of thought in terms of what type of image. It's usually not a painting. It's usually an abstract type of thing happening. And it could be coming from me. And at one point I was using a Leap motion controller to simulate, like the Aretha Franklin image everyone likes. Half of it is Leap motion and processing programming language. I'm using my hand to create these arrays, and they look like fringe on Aretha's coat. And then it became part of her skin, and it became another thing, and to tie it all together. So these ideas are just going through. I'm experimenting, I'm playing around, but I'm also thinking about reflecting what I'm seeing or what I want to be seeing in the image. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of my.
Perfect. Thank you.
Io, we'll be with you in a second. Michael asked a question in the chat first. How long does it take to generate some of these images? Must need a powerful computer.
No, not at all. This laptop I'm on right now is what I use. I have another laptop that's older, and I do it on that one too. It isn't, I am on a project right now that it isn't bandwidth intensive, it's processor intensive, but not this project. I'm doing something around Carnival with Valencia James and Vernell Noel. And we're using something called PoseNet. And it's, Runway ML for machine learning. And we're finding that we're asking people from Barbados and from Trinidad, and they're coming in via Zoom, and we're using this PoseNet to capture, their dances to different around the Caribbean. But it's very intensive in terms of, that's a different process. It's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing can be done, it's used someone else's servers, right? Not really my server. I get the output, but it's not, my computer's not processing it through the generator. The generator app's website is. And I went ahead and became a Patreon member so that I can get all the amenities that come with using because I am, getting some success with using the tool. So the answer, it could take half an hour or 2 days, depending on what I want it to look like.
Cool. Io, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Thank you.
Io.
Yeah. I just wanted to say thank you for just sharing your work with us. And it's truly just an honor to be holding space with you. And I've never seen work like this. So this is truly a privilege. And you talk a lot about your work kind of like leaning into Afrofuturism and Portos. And as a Black person, it really makes me, it like my first thought was kind of like tapping into the spiritual or like tapping into another realm. So a question or kind of like a query I have is, how do you imagine AI or machine learning as kind of projecting Black bodies into the future or into a future space as informed by the past?
So one of the things in collaborating with AI that I learned is that, not that it's stupid, it has an algorithm that it follows, but it doesn't have an ability. I argued with an Uber driver once about this. He turned off the meter and we sat there and argued about it, or debated about it, about when AI will suddenly be artist and when they'll somehow be able to create without human interaction. So, but in this interaction, the artist's hand isn't the AI. So I bring to it a piece and then its algorithm does a thing. And so it can't really function. It functions, but it doesn't function until it's activated with something. So it needs an input. It needs an input or a series of inputs. It needs styles. It needs, data. And that data could be, the reason why we have inherent bias in AI is because there's only one type of data that it's, like not for everyone, but a type of data that isn't everybody. So it then leaves out everybody, or it does something else negative about something that doesn't fit the system. So in terms of Afrofuturism, I thought about even W.B. Du Bois's megascope, and some of the inventions that he describes in Prince of Steel were all about kind of looking at the Industrial Revolution through the eyes of a Black man, thinking about history, in this case, thinking about slavery, but also thinking beyond it, using technology. So using it to scrub time. And so if you think about that, is using the device, it has the data, it has the history, but you're telling the device, I want to see this particular part of history, and I want to maybe even create an alternative history using that technology. And so that was like 1903 when that short story was written. And in the same thing, there's a machine, in this case, a machine we don't see what's happening in the gears running in the back, but we know that, we can understand that there's a data that it has, there's an algorithm that runs things, and then we can sort of tweak the system to create this alternative reality, these alternative images and alternative content that fits more of a future that we want to see for ourselves. Images that we may want to see, or content that we want to see, or stories that we want to see, by working with the system, working with what we give it, the inputs that we give it, and the styles that we give it. I don't know if that answers your questions, but that's my take on it. If we look at Afrofuturism as an example.
Thank you. I just wanted to hear just like more of your process and just like where your head is and what your thoughts are. So thank you.
So I am in an exhibition at the Smithsonian in November. It's a show called Futures. And I was commissioned to do a site-specific installation or using the AI art that I do around 11 futurists or 10 futurists. So Alexander Graham Bell, Octavia Butler, Floyd McKissick, the two scientists that worked on the Moderna vaccine for COVID, and Helen Keller. And so for each one, I had to think about what they contributed. So for Alexander Graham Bell, the style images are his patent. The actual blueprint is one of the styles, as well as wire, things I think about when I think of telephones. And so all of those images became composited and became styles to create his portrait. So I did that for each one of those. For the Moderna vaccine scientist, I used the actual COVID images to create the portrait for them. And then they asked me to do a self-portrait. You actually saw it in the slide that I had, using this Afrofuturistic aesthetic to create my portrait as a featured futurist for Smithsonian. So that became I'm now doing that in a very public way as part of a commission, and for the first time ever. And now someone wants to buy the Octavia Butler one. And so there's a conversation, right? So, and that show hasn't opened yet. It opens in November. But it's a real opportunity to engage just the way I engaged in collaboration in a different way with Hank, with the kids and Hank, and other DJs and other folks. Now I'm doing that with in a different way for exhibition, physical exhibition, as opposed to virtual.
Cool. Anybody more questions, please raise your little Zoom hand or drop them into the chat. In the part of your presentation where you were speaking about the formal and informal education work you've done with kids, I was wondering what's the most important takeaway you hope those kids get from that experience?
So from my experience with the cipher, now I do a cipher every time I teach. So I applied it. In this case, we taught for 4 weeks in Somerville, we taught a high school level art, AI, robotics course. So there's a little bit of art, there's a little bit of AI, and a little bit of robotics. At the end, they had to produce a capstone. In this case, it was a art bot. And so it was a really diverse group. And every day we would circle up, and at the end of the day would circle up, and then we had to design ciphers. So they would get a brief as a PowerPoint, and then they had to do kind of this in a circle or in a cluster, feeding off of each other, the collaborative peer review process that happened, all of that from the hip hop cipher, from exploring that. Happens, it worked out really well. They got used to it. Kids who were shy, their voices got louder and louder every time they had to speak and share in the group. It was about everybody talking, not just the students. Everybody had to get in the cipher, including guests, if they were in the room at the time. It's played a role in how I teach, but it's a model, right? It's a framework for in this case, applying it to education and teaching. And so I apply it in my own work, but I also apply it in teaching because it's engaging. It's not me talking at students, it's them, we all kind of experimenting together. And we're getting together in this kind of circle with guidance and from adults and from visitors and things like that.
It's pretty awesome, pretty awesome. If others don't ask questions, be warned, I'll keep asking them.
And it's in the book as well.
Is it?
I talk about the Hank Shockley moment when I realized, oh, look, here's the hip hop cipher, but then these kids are using conductive paint and Arduinos to project things on the wall, all during the same performance, with Bear Conductive in the room as well as Hank, and all day for that was a real moment of realizing this cipher thing is a bigger thing than just rap or just performance in the traditional sense or conventional sense. It's also in how we make. We can make in the cipher too.
Being a very amateur kind of hip hop historian, or at least somebody who's very interested in it, I feel like the contemporary conceptions of hip hop as sort of a consumable music product doesn't really have that much to do with where it started and the ways in which it was so deeply integrated into community. And
right,
life.
exactly. And one thing I will also say, I realized when doing the readings around this stuff that there was an algorithmic aspect of the way the music's produced that comes from traditional, like conventional R&B, hip, and other things. And so I was with my visualization software, I was like, what does James Brown's music produce? Does it produce patterns that you might see in African textiles? So there's a James Sneed, it was a Yale professor who wrote this essay that I love about repetition and improvisation in Black culture. He used James Brown's Cold Sweat, and he had this notation around it, and in John Coltrane and Toni Morrison. And so I took Cold Sweat and I played it in there with a very simple kind of black and white image or gray image, and it produced these Kuba patterns from like West Central Africa. And I was like, wait, it just proved the theory that, the visual patterns and the quilts and the textiles is very similar in terms of polyrhythms as the music. And if that's the case, then there could be a point that perhaps this music's algorithmic. And if it's algorithmic, you can work with it the same way I work with the machine to create the portraits. And so it was kind of this aha moment that I really, really thought was cool.
But so, folks, I put a link to the JSTOR where you can find that Sneed essay Nettrice mentioned. Sven?
Thanks, Nettrice. This is all fascinating. I want you to talk a little bit about your experience with NFTs.
Yeah, so I did a podcast with, I can't remember his name. I only knew him for 2 seconds, but Golden Levin, me, Tegra Brain, who's also in the Smithsonian show, their book, Coding the Creative Medium, came out with same publisher before mine. And so we were asked, and they invited me on to be in this podcast. And the co-host wanted to talk about NFTs and nobody wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
None of us had any interest in it. So they lengthened the podcast. And at the very end, he's like, so let's talk about cryptocurrency and crypto art. And we were all like, no. So we didn't really get into it. None of us wanted to talk about it. And largely for our environmental reasons. And so a week later, Goldman was like, there's this eco-friendly Hickek-Nunk artist community doing NFTs. And then someone actually gave me a tutorial on how to mint NFTs of my own. And since I had all these images from Deep Dream, I said, well, let me try it out. So in a Friday night, this person gifted me the equivalent of $10 US to mint my first NFT. So I chose one of the stock photo lace images I had that people really loved. And I minted that like 20 editions of it on the blockchain. And within 20 minutes, it sold out. So I went from I never paid, nothing came out of my bank account, out of my pocket. Someone gave me $10. And from $10, 20 minutes later, I had $350. And then you can choose how much and then, by the weekend, I made $1,000. I just kept minting them and people kept selling out and there was this demand. And I realized, oh, wait a minute, I can actually make some money here. And I'm sure if I was on the high consumption blockchain sites like Foundation, I'd probably make 10 times that. But I was happy in my little Hickok-Nunk world where it was kind of eco-friendly and I could use it. And so I did start minting and I had a moment, I joined a collective around bringing more people to eco-friendly Hickok-Nunk. Then there was a big crash in the cryptocurrency that scared me out. So I took all my money, whatever money was left, and I put it in Coinbase and changed it to US dollars because I was afraid of what was happening. But for the first time in my life, I had no gatekeeper. I did have collectors, so people started to collect my work and they would tweet about it and other people want to collect it. Someone else sent me a tweet and said, hey, by the way, I bought your blah, blah, blah NFT, but then I sold it and I made 5 times as much. So when you make 5 times as much, I get a royalty. So anytime, even if I'm not going to get all that, but I get 20%, 25% if you sell it for 5 times as much. So I checked my wallet and found out I had. So there's this gifting thing I liked about the process of bringing me into the space, this idea of watching my wallet go up and down, depending on what was happening. I don't look at stocks. I don't look at in my life, I'm aware of those things, but for the first time ever, I was paying attention to my wallet every day. It was a widget. I was click on the widget and see, oh, it looks like there's a drop in the cryptocurrency today, and I'm going to hang tight. And then when the people started warning me, I said, if that person's warning me, I'm gonna get out of there. So I left a little bit in the wallet and put it in Coinbase quickly. And I minted an NFT that sold a week ago. But the idea of using that to get your work out there and to make some money is really tempting, especially in the pandemic when you can't do a lot of stuff in physical gallery spaces and things like that. So it's become a real, for some people, not all, it's become a way to make money and using your art, but then your art becomes a cryptocurrency token. It becomes a blockchain or a digital asset on a spreadsheet. But someone has an actual image. And then some people, if you buy their NFT, if you purchase it, collect it, they will send you a physical copy of the work. So I actually got a work from someone in Dublin because I liked their image and I paid for the NFT, I collected it, and then they mailed me, it came with a physical copy, a version of that as well.
Cool.
I ask because John is really interested in NFTs, but he's too shy to ask you.
I think, Nettrice, I was having a conversation with Golan, I suspect like a week before y'all did that podcast and started thinking differently about it, because he just ranted and ranted about how much he hated NFTs. And then like 2 weeks later,
Yay,
popped up with
NFTs. And just so you know, so people say, why you say eco-friendly? Just really quick, one Bitcoin is basically 5 transatlantic flights, like one transaction of a Bitcoin. Ethereum, it's like one transatlantic flight in terms of gas consumption of how much energy is generated for that one transaction. And for Tez or Tezos, which is basically it's if you roll your car down halfway down the block, that's a Tez. So that's what is Hekeknunk is using, Tez or Tezos, and that's why people were flocking to Hekeknunk to do that. And then they crashed because they weren't used. These are just guys volunteering, people just volunteering to run it, and they weren't able to keep up. So now they've caught up, and a lot of people went in to try to fix it because it is a worthwhile thing for artists. And so I do still have a space there.
We are about out of time, but if you would be so kind, Nettrice, one last question. A lot of the folks here with us today are students in MFA Design and Technology and the BFA Design and Technology program. I'm curious if you have any words of advice for folks who are still early in their careers, still kind of figuring out their voice, figuring out their place in the creative world. What's a piece of advice you would give them?
So it's interesting, talking to students, like just even high school students who are getting into 3D modeling, for example, using software to create 3D modeling. As a high school student, I met a student at Autodesk because I had a residency there a couple of years ago. And the student said to me, she was a Black girl, and she looked at me and she said, "How are you able to be here? Because you're a Black woman and nobody like you here." I said, "Because I come here just to work. I come here to worry about socializing. I'm busy." But I also told her, I said, "I noticed that your portrait," because they have posters of the kids. And I said, "That pen you made, I made a pen using 3D modeling software in 1988 and 89. And everyone looked shocked. I said, "My first assignment was a pen, a big pen, so is yours." And look at this, look at the change in technology. We're still doing pens, but the technology has changed so much. And if you're willing to, if you're interested, then once you take a step into that world, it kind of adds, you just kind of, adds on. There's an iteration to that. And hopefully my presentation show that. I started out doing cultural heritage and stuff. I'm still doing it, but in a different way. And it's more abstract and it's not so literal all the time. And so I think telling people to stay the course is one thing, but also get used to iteration. Get used to not every single image you see on my site. I've made so many more that look horrible, but you don't see those because they're just in my personal account. And there's some good ones I haven't let out in the world either, but the whole purpose is it's not always going to be great, and to be okay with the failures and creative failures, and also be okay with learning how to do new technologies you hate. I don't really like coding, but I have to sometimes because I want to get to that piece. And so I think that because I have a background in it, it's something that I can do, but it also helps me later on when I want to take on these new technologies. So I don't know.
Awesome. That was about 12 pieces of awesome advice. Okay. very generous of you. So we are out of time. I would like to ask everybody to thank Nettrice one more time. This was a really wonderful kickoff to the 21-22 Cloud Salon. Thank you so much, Nettrice. It was a real honor to have you here today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Nettrice.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everyone. We'll see you next time.
See you in 2 weeks.
There
This
we
was
go.
really wonderful. Thanks so much.
That was
Yeah.
amazing. That was amazing.
Yeah.
It was
There's a
amazing.
bug that flew into my eye right before. I don't know if you saw me just swat. But it's the second time that's happened when I sat in this position. There's been a bug.
There's a bug that's coming for you.
Came for me. The fan
Oh.
is helping to blow it in my face, but whatever.
Oh, yeah. What is the image behind you?
That is some archival footage. So I put that through the deep learning process from the 30s, I believe. And it's just a still from the film. And I got the archival film while watching the James Brown documentary. And then I brought that still into the process and it created this background you see here.
It's cool. Very cool. All right. Well, we won't keep you any longer, Nettrice, but that was awesome seeing you again.
Sure.
And I try not to take 4 years or 5 years or however long before I see you next time.
Yes. Come see the show at the Smithsonian.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Have a good night.
All right. Good night,
Good
everybody.
night.
Bye,
Thank you.
Richard.